Hi, good morning. I'm so sorry. I just realized the title for today's talk still says Sebastian. I won't be able to fix that until later on. This is not
I'm not
Friday's
Sebastian.
talk, not Sebastian. I'm so sorry. Today is one of the peace focused talks for this month as we lead into the 75th anniversary of Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombing. And I'm so lucky to have Kathleen Burkinshaw here today to talk about your wonderful book that you've written for young readers to know more about the Hiroshima experience through your mother's stories. So thank you so much for joining.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me today.
Wonderful. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself before we start in with the questions?
Sure. As you know, I am a Japanese American author. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I usually talk about the book that came first before the book came, so it was an interesting journey for that. I have a daughter who is out of college last year, and I have my husband and a kitchen ninja dog. So, and the I think I'll let you go ahead with the questions. I'm not quite sure where you want to start. So.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Um, so you're born and raised in North Carolina.
Actually, I was born and raised in Rhode Island.
Okay.
We moved to North Carolina about 13 years ago. I have the disease that I have reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It is exacerbated, the pain is exacerbated with the cold. So the last winter that we had up in Rhode Island, I was in a wheelchair and my doctor had said, you need to do something. So we figured North Carolina is kind of in the middle of family, so it might be a good place. And it definitely has helped a lot. So I went from the wheelchair to using a cane or a walker during a flare up. So it's much better.
So certain temperatures is a lot better for your condition, is it?
Yes, the warmer temperatures, but then with the barometric pressure, any type of change to that can also bring on a pain flare. So it's kind of hard to judge. Even if it's going to be like a lot of rain the next day, it will still affect it somehow.
Wow.
So,
And I
yeah.
read in one of your introductions that they think your disease is connected to your mother being exposed to radiation. Is that right?
Yes, when I went to some physicians in Boston, they had said that sometimes what happens with RSD, it can also be an attack from your immune system. And my immune system was very, very bad. And I was sick a lot as a kid, but it didn't dawn on me that it could be that. And they really felt that because she was exposed to radiation at that time, then that opened me up to be more susceptible for this syndrome. So.
Oh, God. Did your mother also suffer a lot of health problems growing?
We were very blessed because she was not really ill until the last few months of her life. She had asthma, but it wasn't something that completely stopped her. So she was very lucky that she really didn't. She always expected something to happen, but
Yeah. There's still a lot, I think, with nuclear power and radiation that is not completely understood. And I think
yes,
in a very sad way, science is kind of encouraged not to, as long as nuclear power is legal and promoted, it's science is not getting the funding it needs to find the truth for a lot of these things, right?
so true. It's true. And there are some entities who are trying to do this gender study of mostly females that are affected the most from radiation, whether it be from a nuclear power plant or from nuclear testing or from the bombing. So it's really interesting and how they're now trying to really promote that and to bring it out in the forefront, which I think is wonderful. It will help a lot of people, I think. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Let me just introduce your social media. So we're looking at your website right now, KathleenBurkinshaw.com, and you have a lot of your book information, of course, and your
Mhm.
media appearances. Anything else people can expect from your website?
I'd also give some information about what I do when I go out to present to students or when I do virtual visits for them. It gives them an idea of some of the articles that were written so that they can see what was talked about in the book and to get a better idea of some of the reasons why I want to do this peaceful discussions and to promote this and why I chose to utilize a book that's for middle grade and up. But and why I want to use them, because they're going to be the future voters and future leaders. And I really feel that it's such an interesting connection that we need to make. And so some of that is also there as well. So.
I think it's so important. I was so glad that you had time to talk to us, because I think the whole focus of getting young people to think about these issues is so key to the future of not having nuclear weapons, and to just have a better understanding. It was really sparked by your daughter. You say, do you want to tell that story?
Yes, sure. My daughter was in seventh grade, so that's almost 10 years ago now. And she came home from school very upset. She said they ended their unit on World War II, and it had the 2 paragraphs about the bombing and then a mushroom cloud picture. And she said she overheard some kids saying, "What a cool mushroom cloud picture that was." And she asked if I would go talk about people who were under those mushroom clouds that day, like her grandmother. And that's really what started me doing that, because when I called to ask my mom permission to discuss it, she had always been very private. And so I never spoke about it before. That was really the first time. And it wasn't until I was 11 when I learned that she was actually from Hiroshima and not Tokyo, which she had always said. And the reason why that only came about is she had these horrible nightmares every August. And I happen to remember that the last August she was also that way. And I think I pestered her enough where she finally said that she was born in Hiroshima, but she lost her home and her family and friends with the atomic bombing. And then she said, "Please don't tell anyone." So I went through my school years. I read the John Hersey book. That was really the first time I got a feel for what she might have gone through. And I remember being so horrified and so sad that she experienced that. And I tried to talk with her about it, but she said, "It's still too painful. I can't talk about it." So it wasn't really until I was 30. And that was when I had had a serious series of DVTs, deep vein thrombosis, and I was in the hospital for over a month. So by the time I came home, I needed someone to help take care of me, and my daughter was 4 then, so my parents would come during the day while my husband worked. And that's when my mom started to talk to me a little bit more about her childhood in general. And then right about the time I was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, I was very distressed, and I was kind of losing hope, because all of a sudden the field and the career that I worked so hard to do in healthcare management, that was going to be gone. I could no longer do that. And then I worried about, how am I going to be a good mom for my 4-year-old if I can't walk well or use my hands well? So she started to tell me what happened that day. And she really wanted me to understand that she almost gave up. And she's very glad that she didn't kill herself that day, because then she found my love for me, for my daughter. She wouldn't have had any of that had she just given up. So she tried to remind me, that same blood, that same samurai blood, it runs through you too. And I know that you can find a way to push through it. So it was really interesting how she finally gave me the information. And it was interesting also because I thought I was helping her, so she could have an outlet, but she was really doing it to help me. And so as a mom, I guess you just never know. It doesn't stop. Yeah. So when I called her that day and I asked her about it, and she said, yes, I could talk about it. And it surprised me. And she said to me, the students are all going to be around the age that I was at 12 and a half. So they might relate to me better. They might relate to my story better. And so that way, being future voters, that was her big thing, was that they would then leave the classroom knowing that nuclear weapons should never be used again. And so that's really what set things off. And I started speaking at this particular school. They invited me back the following year. And then I started other schools. And some teachers asked me, is there some kind of a book that we could use in the curriculum for this, to have the other side, the Pacific side? And that's when I started working on it. I mean, I had notes that I was trying to keep for my daughter, just personal. And so I called my mom and I told her, people want to read more about this. And she's, I just can't understand. I'm so surprised that someone would want to know what happened to this little girl all the way in Japan. And what she ended up sending is to really cement it to me that this is the right thing to do. She had a favorite photo of hers, and I think you have one of them. It's in the book, of her and her papa. And that was the one thing. She may not have told me she was from Hiroshima, but I did know how important her papa was in her life, how they had a special place in the home just for that. And when I received a copy of the picture, that's when I realized that I really need to start the book before, because she had so many happy memories too, to really understand it wasn't just the horror of that day. And so that's what made me decide I'm going to start it about 6 months or so before the bombing, and also to give a chance for people to understand the culture, and to, because it was also very different politically over there, of how they saw their leader versus how the Allied people would see their leaders. And I wanted to show that the mindset of the people at that time too, because they were all the children, like my mom, they loved their families and their friends, and they wished for peace. And that was the same thing that the Allied children were also feeling. So I really felt that it was really important, so that it's not just 2 paragraphs in a textbook and wraps it up in a tidy bow and say we dropped the bombs, the war was over. There's a lot more to it than that. And I'm hoping that by reading it, they have some empathy, and it brings more of an emotional connection for them to know there were families here, there were children here, there were older people there. And the more that they learn about that, then they can kind of see, okay, there were people there. So a nuclear bomb may not be the best answer anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that really maybe helps as far as that goes for that
Definitely.
piece of it. So that was also why it was very important.
Making a personal connection to young people about Hiroshima, not just it's a cool bomb, or mushroom cloud, oh, that's
Right.
edgy, or often you'll hear like, what band is it? It's a famous pop band, and they drop Hiroshima, I'm gonna do something to you like Hiroshima, and as a pop lyric, and it appears in pop culture, and it diminishes the power of the actual event. And it's in that way, to young people, they need that connection back to the reality, back to what really happened.
Because I don't think that the kids were being cruel when they were talking about it. They just didn't know. They didn't know about the people that were there. And my big thing too is, even though this was 75 years ago, it can be very much used in today, because I'm hoping that a student or a reader will look at this and think, okay, they are not so different from me. The ones that we think don't belong, the ones that we think are our enemy, they're not really all so different from ourselves. We all have a need for a human connection. We all have hearts. And I think if we can start looking at it as humanity instead of just saying, the enemy, then that way maybe we won't repeat the same deadly mistakes again.
There was a American group in Hawaii that made a musical play about Sadako and Sadako's story. And I just happened to be back in Hawaii when they were performing, and I was so glad to see that. And then Sadako's brother actually came from Japan, and he was there at the performance as well. So that was a really special event. But really, your story really reminds me of that. They were trying to connect to young people about the story of someone who lived through the bombing and suffered after. It was really powerful. Yes. And I know in Hiroshima's museum, Memorial Museum, the Sadako section is one of the most popular, and there's her friends dedicated the children's monument of her holding the cranes.
Yes, with the dove and the crane, yeah.
But I'm so glad your book is also connecting, and your talks to students directly is also connecting. And I think having people in the U.S., based in the U.S., not just visiting, but really based there and writing materials in English is so powerful. So thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'd like yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no, I was just saying it was really a labor of love of being able to do this and being able to show students, especially with my mom being 12 and they're around the same age. I think they can kind of relate so much better with that, and it's more vivid and it's more through her eyes. And I think by doing that, it becomes a little bit more impactful than just reading the textbook for that.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I noticed in Wind on Her Wings, I think, is the Sadako musical story, is they talked a lot about Japanese culture for young people. And I noticed you're doing that as well. You're talking about the Girls' Day dolls and things like that.
Yes.
Can you?
It was it was really interesting to try to do that because I felt that's how you can kind of understand how the people are, because their culture is sort of like a silent way of describing this is our heart, this is how we live, this is what's important to us. And it really, from what I've heard, is that it really draws them in and it makes them understand that world. They can picture what's going on there, and it makes it that much more real to them, instead of just something so far away. So I really was hoping to put more of that, and I was so glad that the publisher let me do that. And that's why I also put the glossary at the end, because I wanted to sparkle a little bit more of Japanese words, but then also they could have the definition for it as well. So trying to keep the authenticity was very important to me, especially in how the language works. It's usually more polite form that's used between adults and children to the adults. And I wanted to separate that because it would be too stilted. And I really thought, okay, well, then when Yuriko is talking to her friend, then it'll be contractions, or when she's talking. And then otherwise they wouldn't use contractions. And so that they could really kind of get a feel of the way the language was, even though it's in English, they could get a feel for that, of how they did certain things. And I really enjoyed learning more about it because I didn't know as much about Japanese culture growing up. My mom didn't really go in that route. She kind of Americanized, is what she called it. So I wasn't taught Japanese. I only knew some of the folk tales, and she would sing some songs to me in Japanese, but that was about it. So it was really exciting to be able to know more about it and be able to keep those kind of traditions, maybe going in the future as well for my daughter too. So.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think part of the reason, like we were talking about before we started today, your mom had survivor guilt. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. At the end of the war, after the bombing, she stayed close to Hiroshima for another year. But then she moved with another family member, and they went to Tokyo. And at that point in time, she was trying to deal with losing everyone that was important to her. She had no physical home to go to anymore. She lost her friend, and she was trying to feel, how do I keep going when those people aren't here to keep going with me? Is it fair that I can go to a movie, that I can still listen to my favorite jazz record when my friend Machiko cannot? It was a lot of that kind of tugging. And I think, she also said she kind of tempted fate a lot to just see, she didn't think that she should still be alive. So she would do things that were not very smart, crossing a street when it's too close where a car might hit you. I mean, she kind of went through that, but she also had a lot of issues with when she met somebody. Now, the Tokyo dialect and Hiroshima dialect are a little bit different, just like you have accents in the South that might be different from the North. And so she said initially the way she spoke, they could say, oh, you're from that area. And then she would just say, yes, I was from Hiroshima. And she said people literally would take a step back away from her because they didn't know how radiation worked. And they thought that by just being near her, she would just, radiate off whatever she has to them. And she found that so sad and so shocking. And that's when she tried to speak a little bit different with her dialect and the accent that she used, as well as now telling people she's actually from Tokyo, because then they wouldn't question any further. And it also wouldn't put more of a spotlight on her as well. But she faced a lot of, if people knew you're from Hiroshima, then they may not want you to marry into the family because they didn't know if there'd be birth defects or how that would go. And I remember when I was dating my now husband, my mom would tell me, don't tell him I was from Hiroshima because then they may think something. And I was just so shocked that all these years later that she would still feel that way. My husband took me on anyway, but it was just kind of interesting to know that she had to hide it. The other piece of it is that during the occupation years, they didn't want anyone really talking about what happened in Hiroshima. And so she went through something so horrible, but now they're not supposed to talk about it. And it was a very much of a difficult situation for her of does she forget the past or does she try to keep pieces of it alive? It was very, very hard. And she still dealt with PTSD, which wasn't diagnosed then. There was no words for it. There was no mental health providers that could deal that with you. So she kind of just bottled it all up inside. And she met my dad in 1959. and he was serving in the Air Force, and they got married at the Tokyo embassy there for U.S. And then they came to the States, and my mom was really shocked that when they moved here, there was still so much prejudice. Even 15 years later, she was really surprised. She didn't expect that, especially since she came from the losing side. So from that point, she would just say Tokyo because she didn't want to bring any attention to herself. But she faced so many racial slurs, and that's why she Americanized when I was born, because she was hoping that I wouldn't run into that, which I still did a little bit anyway. But so that's why it's just so interesting of what she went through, and she took it back after she had me. And she had a lot of bouts of depression, but I didn't understand that at the time. So when she finally told me when I was in my 30s, I went, oh, that's why. You know, she would sit in a darkened room sometimes. That's why she might have a little bit more anger issues, than certain things would spark a memory in her and would upset her very much. And I just feel bad because during that time she felt that she couldn't tell anyone. And I was the first one that she really told everything to. And it broke my heart to know you had to spend all those years just trying to forget that it happened or not saying anything, and it would just eat away at her. And so I am glad that she finally got to tell me, but it was just surprising of how different, you know, she received prejudice in her own country for where she was from. And then when she came to the States, she experienced it again. So it was kind of like a double whammy for her to deal with.
I think for sure the stigma carries, right, a long time and generations. Oh, yeah. And then on top of that, you have the fear of stigma. So even if you don't get the stigma, you have the fear and the worry and the anxiety that you will get it, which is also part of the problem with radiation and nuclear weapons. And, you know, it's long lasting. It's not just a bomb that helps you win a war and then it's over. It's very far reaching.
So much more. Yes. And it goes into the next generations, and which is surprising, I think, to some people. They wouldn't really assume that that would happen, but it does. And, you know, even when my mom had me 10 years before, she had a miscarriage, and then the doctor said, well, you won't be able to have a baby. And then so it was kind of a surprise, a nice surprise, but it was, you know, she always worried about what was going to happen. And I never told her that they said that it's related to her being in Hiroshima. I didn't want her to feel guilty for it. She shouldn't, but I knew she would. And because she worried so much about stigma, so I made a point of not letting her know at all where that would come from. So
even, I mean, the really powerful photo that you showed me and you have in your book, I think, is her cutting out her own picture from her family picture.
Yes, yeah. It's not in the book, but I use it a lot in my presentations. And she cut herself out because she was the only one that was still alive from that picture, and she didn't feel she should be there. So that's why she did that.
Yeah, it's really powerful, isn't it? So she didn't want to keep the family photo of her in there because everybody else had died. And that's part of the survivor guilt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that from hibakusha survivors when they give testimony every year in Hiroshima, and it's so powerful and it's so hard to hear, but it's so important to support their effort to tell their story, because I hear so many things mirroring what you've said about not wanting to tell the story, and who would want to listen to that, and then the stigma, you know, like all the similar themes that I've heard so many times. So I really want to support anyone who wants to tell their story, even if it's hard to hear, you know. So
thank you.
Yeah, your book is helping in that way too.
I like to think it is, so that is nice to hear. And you know, when you think about things such as the stigmas, you know, she also went as far as, when I went to college, she said, you don't check off, you know, when they would have, are you Caucasian or Asian, or she wouldn't let me do Asian. She says, I don't want them to know, because what if they ask questions? And, you know, I was 18 at that point. So it was just, and it still didn't dawn on me until she started talking about what happened and what she had to keep. So it just kept kind of stretching into it. Which was really surprising to me. And she really had that, and she really had those awful nightmares every August until she passed away. And it would wake her up screaming. And when I wrote the book, there were some difficult scenes because she would tell me what happened, and every time she told her story, she would cry as if, I'm sorry, I always get emotional when I say
No,
that.
that's okay.
Um, she would cry as if it was happening in front of her all over again. And it caused me so much pain to have her discuss that. And then when I wrote the chapters, trying to be the 12-year-old, thinking, all right, well, how would I feel with what she had seen? And it was so emotionally heartbreaking and draining. And when I wrote those chapters, I really had to then step back for a week or so and just not do anything related, because I just kind of felt so empathetic with it that I just, it broke my heart. And my mom was not one to cry very much. So to see her break down, and after losing people that she loved, that just stays with me,
Wow.
It'll probably stay with me forever.
Of course. Powerful. And because it's not exactly nonfiction, you have your personal take, you're creating an interesting story for young readers with characters and everything, but it is really based on your mom's story, right?
It definitely is, and it's called fiction because, like, the conversations may not have exactly happened, and also the timeline of events in my mom's life were a little bit more spread out, but I had to get it in with that framework. And so the family mystery that happens in there, that she finds out about, that's true. And everything that I wrote about what she saw that day and the days after, that's straight from her. So it's historically pretty much, I do a lot of research too, because when I wanted to write about what Japan was like at that time, I wanted to be sure that if I mentioned something, it was really there. And trying to find that information when you're in the States, you don't read Japanese. So it was a lot of creative things that I had to try to do to make it a little bit more. So I think it's more nonfiction than fiction, but the historical piece and the story piece of it, I think, kind of lends it to be more.
And you tell us a little bit more about the storyline of the book. So you started 4 months before the bombing, is that right?
I think it was, October, November, December, January. Or it's about 8 months. About 8 months, sorry.
That's okay.
Double check what So, yes.
And it's based on your mother's story through conversations that you had after your her granddaughter, started asking questions
Yes.
to her. And then it started all coming out, right? And then,
Yes.
So in the story, give us an idea of the characters and the storyline.
The main character, based on my mom, is Yuriko, and she is very feisty. My mom was very determined in certain things. She also knew that she was a little bit spoiled because she was the only girl and the only child there for a while. And she didn't like things like homework or keeping things clean. And she didn't like her cousin that was living there. She would pick on him all the time. So she was very typical, I think. And she had to deal with this family, a remarriage happening, and trying to adjust to a new family situation, which I think a lot of times a lot of us are going through that too. And her papa, he owned the newspaper company in town, and he was also pretty prominent and successful. And when they hit wartime, which was interesting too, because when I started to research, I realized that Japan had been at war since 1931 when they first invaded Manchuria, and my mom was born in 32. So that's all she had as a background for it. And as they got into more of the rations and what they needed to do, her papa helped. And he wanted to do certain things. So there was a love that he had for her, which he would do anything for her, but also that he would help in the community. And also part of the things that I wanted to discuss there was the whole propaganda that kind of goes in with his personality. When he was doing the stories, a lot of times you had to send it through to the government first, and you could only do what they told you. The first time that he reported a lie that he didn't know was a lie is when they said that the Battle of Midway was won by Japan, which it wasn't, and it was a pivotal battle. So that's when he decided, because he wants to do everything, he's supposed to be honest, and that's why he started reporting the news in the first place. So he would hire someone to be the editor should somebody come in and say, you shouldn't have printed that, you have to go to jail, and that was that one person's job. But that kind of showed his character, and how he was kind of reluctant to keep going because he knew that something wasn't going right, that they weren't winning it, and he wasn't willing to give up everything because of that. And she has her aunt Kimiko, who she does not get along with at all. There's a lot of tension. She's also the mom of Genji, which is the 5-year-old. So there's a power play that goes on that she doesn't really understand why until towards the end of the book, of the way that she's been treated. And her best friend is Machiko, and she lived a couple houses down from where my mom was. And it was very hard for my mom to make friends. So when she finally found someone, and Machiko was a couple years older than her, but she found someone who just wanted to be a friend, not because of what her family had or, where she came from. It's just that she liked her, and she really enjoyed having that. And I think Machiko brought out the best in Yuriko. So those are pretty much the characters that are in there. And towards the end of the book, there is a different character. I don't know how much I should go into it, but she finds another family member that she didn't know she had. So it's a very interesting kind of take on it. And so pretty much those characters, I hope, can kind of bring what was happening in 1944, 1945 in Japan a little bit more alive for everyone. So you're learning something, but you're also getting a piece of the culture at the same time.
Yeah. There was a famous anime movie that came out, and it's about very similar, right? The young girl growing up in Kure, which is a naval town just near Hiroshima. Yep. And they've made a sequel, which just came out recently, I think.
Oh.
And so, all in Japanese, but you can get it subtitled now, I think.
Subtitled.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But having having the glimpse of traditional Japanese life at that time during the wartime is really powerful, because I think it's something a lot of people don't realize, what people were living like or what the reality was, right?
Yes, exactly. And sometimes the students will say it then led them to have conversations with their grandparents to ask about their experience during that time, which I thought was wonderful, because they could find a lot of comparisons to that, and they'd be learning about their own family. So that was really an extra thing that came out of the book that I did not expect. So it's a wonderful piece from that was totally unexpected. So
that's great. And of course, the central characters are your mom and her father, right? And their close connection.
Yes, they were together alone for a little while, and they grew very close. And he wanted to do certain things with her. And a lot of times the women in the house would tell her, don't do this, don't do that. And he wasn't one to always do that with her. So they could just kind of relax up on the veranda. That's one of her favorite memories. And her hair was very wiry and wasn't nice and smooth like the other girls, but he would be the one that would brush it. The only one that said he would do it. And to see it kind of unfold, which I tried to make kind of close to what my mother would describe about the love that they had for each other. And because I could always tell when my mom talked about him that he was feeling the same way about her. And that was such a special memories for her. And I really wanted the reader to get that piece of it, of how close they were. And then by losing him, how difficult it was to want to keep going forward as well. So.
That's so wonderful to have that really important relationship as she was growing up with her father. When you talk about your book to young people, you go around to high schools and schools around America. What are the kinds of questions or comments that they give you about your book?
Well, usually the comment is, I didn't have any idea of just what happened over there. And I didn't know that there were families that were there. I didn't know how much damage that the bomb had done that was so different from a regular bombing. And then they'll also be surprised at wanting to know more about the culture. And they would also ask about my mom afterwards, because they're always very curious about that, because in the book it does talk about where she had contemplated suicide at one point, and that was really true. But they're really, then when they come up and they will thank me and tell my mom, thank you for sharing the story, for giving them a piece that they had no idea existed. And now they totally think about nuclear weapons in a different way. And it's just very touching to me that it can be so relevant to them. And they've all been so compassionate, no matter whether it's from 7th grade or 5th grade or high school. They've always been so compassionate and such thoughtful questions about, well, how did your mom feel after the bomb was dropped? Was she angry? And yes, she was. And the interesting thing, though, is the more that you read about what happened and from what my mom told me, the people hated that they lost. They obviously didn't like what happened, but also because they were at war for all that time, they just wanted to start living their life at that point and trying to move forward. What I also like to tell them to kind of show how my mom was, she was not a violent person, but in her late teens, she felt that she wanted to get back somehow. And so that's when she started dating the American soldiers that were there. And then she broke their hearts. That was her way of getting back at them. So, but then she met my dad and that ended. But at least for a little while. So that kind of gives more of her personality. And they really wanted to know, well, what happened later? Or, when she had you, how did you feel? And, that question is very, it is a difficult one because they would say, you're born in America. Your father is, a white American, and your mom's from Japan. So when you had to write this, how did you go about doing it? And, I said, I didn't look at it through a Japanese lens. I didn't look at it through an American lens. I looked at it through a 12-year-old girl and what her life, how it was falling apart and igniting at the same time for her. And so I think hopefully that makes a difference where it's not political. It's just about this is what happened to her family. And they're very interested on how that would go. And that, was a concern. My father was always worried about me writing this and maybe somebody will say something. But the way I wanted to do it, I really didn't think that there would be because it doesn't negate what happened to anyone. And my mom would always be the first to say that war was just hellish for both sides. And, because she was able to think that way, when I would watch how she would discuss things, it really gave me a better way of how to look at it in that sense. So,
yeah, amazing. Can you tell us why you chose the title?
Sure. I chose The Last Cherry Blossom for a few reasons. The first one is it was my mom's favorite time of year. And it was also the last time that her entire family was all together. Also, with the bombing in August, they felt that nothing would grow again for like 5 years. But the following spring, the cherry blossoms bloomed. They didn't all bloom, but they bloomed. And I just felt that it shows the resilience and the persistence of the Japanese people at that time, that they were going to persevere and move forward somehow to make something out of nothing. Where they were starting from. So that kind of gave me the thinking of using that for the title. And I was glad the publisher liked it. So.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And there's this great quote from your book. From her father says in the book, cherry blossoms are like life itself, so beautiful yet so fragile that they bloom only a short time.
Yes, and I think that was very appropriate of what a foreshadowing too, but it's very much of what it is for them, and to see the beauty out of something, even though you can't always find it, but to find some way. And I think my mom would say that she wasn't always very traditional, but I think she kept some of those stories in her head, and I really think that is what also helped her to propel, is by remembering what her papa told her about their family, about the honor, about the strength. And so I think she constantly, relied on that more than she would admit that she did. So
yeah, great. Also, talking about resilience and rebirth, you were part of a project to bring some Hiroshima seeds to your area.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I was able to partner with Green Legacy Hiroshima, which what they do is they collect seed from the seeds from trees that actually survived the atomic bombing, and they would grow them into saplings, and then they're sent all over the world as a sign of peace. So it was a little different how I did it, because they actually had a sapling already growing at someone's home that's part of the Green Legacy Hiroshima. And so we drove to Atlanta to pick it up and then bring it back. And we were able to plant it at my daughter's school, which was UNC Wilmington. And one of the reasons that we chose that place is it was the only college my mom got to tour with my daughter. And she was also minoring in Japanese. So they had Japanese education, and the way they planted it was near the education building. And it was really a beautiful partnership, because my daughter kind of took over and spearheaded the fundraising with her Japan club, worked with her professor of Japanese, and they were able to put something together and do a beautiful dedication ceremony, and to plant it so that when people look at it, as they would with any other states, North Carolina, I was able to make it the 7th state in the US to actually have one that was planted. And so they'll look at that and they'll see the plaque and they'll realize it has to do with the atomic bombing, but it also honors all the atomic bomb victims and all the victims of war. And so they can see this rebirth being planted and some peace that can come out of it. And they can understand why there should be, no more Hiroshimas and no more Nagasaki's ever again. And it will give shade. And I'll have to say, it's been growing very well. We had a hurricane last year that came through Wilmington pretty badly, but it withstood that, and it's growing well. It's a ginkgo tree, and it's just lovely to see of the strength, which kind of also goes back to me of the people, of my mom. So,
Wow, wonderful. Yeah, it's amazing to me. I love the surviving trees in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I love to walk around the city and to find there's maps that you can follow and find them all.
oh,
And
that's right.
it's such a beautiful story of resilience and the hope for peace, or the possibility of rebirth and peace after such devastation. Yeah,
Yes.
amazing.
Yes. Yes, when we went to Hiroshima and to see some of those trees also, it was pretty profound to be able to see that. And I never got to go back with my mom. She never wanted to go, but we visited Tokyo when I was 8 years old to see the woman that I knew as my grandmother. And she wasn't ready to go back then. So she passed away in January of 2015, and we decided that summer we were going to go and honor her by getting her on the memorial wall of the atomic bomb victims, and be able to put her name in the special book that's under the cenotaph that's put out every year. So we were able to do that and kind of bring her back in sort of a way, and let her be back with her papa, which is where she is on the wall next to him, and to be able to see where she grew up. And as much as it was difficult at the Peace Park, and I remember my daughter and I standing in front of the A-dome, and I researched it, I saw pictures, I heard my mother talk about it. But when you're standing there and you just picture what she must have seen, at 12 years old, and it just, my daughter and I, we were crying for most of the time we were there, because it was just heartbreaking. But I'm so glad that we went, because we were able to learn so much more, and to see the people there where all they want to do is keep promoting peace. It was beautiful. And also, it was so pretty there. My mom always said she grew up in the most beautiful place. And I kept thinking of it at that point of just, the horror of that day, but she had the mountains and the sea is there, and there were palm trees, and I never thought there would be palm trees. It just didn't occur to me, and it was so pretty. And we went to one of the islands, Miyajima Island, and we went to the shrine that's there, and my mom used to go there as a child. So when we were walking that path, my daughter turned to me and said, "We're seeing it like Grandma saw it." And it was just so nice to feel that closeness. Even after she had passed away.
Yeah, I was in the Peace Park yesterday for the Black Lives Matter march, and we ended in Peace Park, and the speaker who organized the event was talking about how significant Hiroshima is for the current Black Lives Matter movement, for the current issues. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? What you see in your area as well?
Well, I think that they're trying to show how they have been treated for so long, and trying to show we need to focus on this, Black Lives Matter, that's what we need to do. And it reminds of how, too, of when my mom came, and how things were treated and how she was treated. It's nowhere, it's not the same caliber, but I think you can I feel a lot of empathy for it because I knew what she had to go through when she came to this country and how she was treated when she first came to this country. So I think when we think of peace and wanting to move forward, I think that's a wonderful thing, which I think it's more possible now than it was in the past. It does seem to be some issues are going to be covered. So I think by having that peace and knowing that if it can happen, in Hiroshima, we can use that to come back from something so horrific, that it can be beautiful at some point again, and
Definitely.
to have hope for that.
Yeah. I have a talk with the head of UNITAR next week, and UNITAR is organizing the Green Legacy, which sends the seeds of hope from Hiroshima and Nagasaki around the world.
Oh, right. Yes.
But also UNITAR's location is right next to the A-bomb dome. So they invite people from around Asia to come who are having conflicts, warring nations, and to try to get them to negotiate and try to find compromise and do workshops and things. And when they look out at the A-bomb dome, it is such a powerful place to be and to see that and to think, yes, if we don't figure out a way to move forward together, this is what happens. And so the Peace Park was designed in such a beautiful way where it's open. It has so much symbolic meaning, and it has so much beautiful nature that everything is in balance in a way for you to take in the horrible information, but to somehow recover, right? Yeah. Because of the trees and everything. I'm so glad you had a chance to visit. It's a special place.
Me too. It was very special.
We had a comment here from Wendy. She said, "Thank you for sharing your family's story and the process of writing your book. I'm looking forward to reading it."
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Wendy. Let's talk a little bit about some of the news that you've been in. So you were at the UN bookshop introducing your book. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I was invited a year ago. The United Nations had adopted my book as an education resource for students and teachers, and that was just so exciting to have that. So then this past October, they decided they always do this thing with New York City teachers every November. I think it's on an election day, so the schools are closed anyway, but they want to know how to build nuclear disarmament talk into their curriculums. And so the teachers gather there, and they invited me to be a part of that session, and then to also do the bookshop talk, to be able to talk about my book and my mother's story there as well. And it was magical because being in a room with all these teachers, and they're also wanting to bring some peace, some words of peace to it, and it just fills your heart to know that they're so concerned about such an issue when they don't have really anyone that ever went through it, but they're pushing for this. And I was able to meet the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize winner, which was part of the International Commission for the Abolishment of Nuclear Weapons. So they were under that umbrella. So to be able to sit next to and to talk with people who actually worked on something, which is a treaty against nuclear weapons, it was just an amazing opportunity. And to be able to meet with everyone that I met there, and that's how NHK ended up being involved as well. So we had met them there, and about a month later, maybe 2-3 weeks later, they had been in contact, and we discussed, and actually my spam folder took it. I didn't even get a regular email, and I just happened to check it that day, and I see NHK, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I spoke a lot with the main reporter, and they wanted to put something in the news, and then he said, I think we really need to do a little bit more. They want to come to Charlotte, North Carolina, and that just blew me away. They wanted to interview me and my daughter because they knew that it was like the 3 female generations of the Ishikawa family working together. And they also wanted to cover part of my school visits that I do. And it was just an amazing thought to know that I could talk about my mom, I was able to honor her at the United Nations, and now I can tell more of her story. And it will be shown in her home country in Japanese in one of the Japanese programs. And then they did another segment in a Newsline Tokyo in English. And just to know that her story is out there, and from someone who thought no one's going to care about my story, and then to be able to do that, it was such an honor for me. And it was a magical couple of months, and we were lucky because it happened at the end of January in 2020. So right after that, everything kind of went kaplooey. So it was just, it made it in just in the nick of time. And the reporters, they were just so empathetic, and it was so wonderful to see how they feel that peace is important, and by talking to the younger generation who don't know very much about it, and why we need to keep talking about it, and how my mom really felt that it would be for the younger generation to hear that story. Obviously adults can read it too, but just to know that this is an area where we have a lack. And so now we can fill this. We can fill the cracks of unknown. We can fill the cracks of maybe not understanding and not caring to empathy. And I just think by having that connection, that's so important to me, because I really feel that I'm hoping to bring empathy through this for Japan, for what happened in the war, for the people there. But it's also by taking that empathy that maybe they could then apply it, to issues like Black Lives Matter. And be able to see a side where they may not have known about before, or they may not have known everything before. So I hope it's like a precursor that, of course, teaches not to have nuclear weapons, but in the other sense as well. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Also, you were featured in Kyoto News.
Yes, there was a wonderful reporter that was there, and he wanted to interview me with some questions. So we did this by email back and forth. And when it appeared in that, I was really amazed. And then he said the Japan Times picked it up, so that they also had it in their paper version as well as their online, that blew me away. So it was really been a wonderful thing. And there's an Asian American, Japanese American, Rafu Shippo, I think I'm saying that right, for that newspaper. And it was also in there. So it's a wonderful thing that the direction that it went in was so unexpected. And, to me, it just continues to be able to spread her story. And every time I talk about her, it's like I'm visiting with her once again. So
wonderful. The Rafu Shimpo is really interesting. You say on your website it's the largest Japanese American newspaper since 1903.
In the United States, yes.
Wow.
And I knew they were around a long time, but before I wrote that part of it, I was like, wow. That's such an important paper. Of all the things that they must have reported on, to be in a piece of that, and my mom too, that was just very special.
And you sent me also a page of links, nuclear disarmament links. Do you want to introduce that?
Sure. I usually want to have that on there so that the students can go to various sites as well. And of course, the United Nations one is there, but I also put one on there that can give you a simulation of what would happen now, and just to get an idea, because the big thing that I try to say after I've shown some pictures of what some of the damage was, and the burns were different, and the radiation, is that I then like to say, well, the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima had the strength of 15,000 tons of TNT, and the largest nuclear weapon in the U.S. arsenal has the strength of 1.2 million tons of TNT. So I feel that it's very important that they understand if that much damage happened with that small bomb, of what could happen, and that we no longer are the only ones with one as well. So one of the websites will talk about that a little bit more, of what could happen. And I think that, we have a lot of statistics that we give out, and we want the treaty to be passed to ban nuclear weapons. But I really feel if they don't start learning about the humanity and the personal stories, none of that stuff is going to matter to them. And so being able to play this hand in hand, so that's why I always like to include sites like that the students can go to, or what they could do as far as nuclear weapons, what if they could sign something that's going around as well. So it's been interesting to have that, and I think they've gotten feedback from the teachers, and they like that because sometimes they add it to the lesson because they can make it, a language arts course as well as social studies, and then they bring in the culture, and they can look up those sites to talk more about nuclear weapons. So it's been a good way to kind of combine everything.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it's great to have active research tools that teachers can then get their students to go and find out more information on their own.
Yes.
I think especially in the American education system or IB education system, that's so important. And it works so well, that component of getting students to find out things for themselves, not just feeding them the information.
Exactly, exactly. And then you know that information is going to mean something to them and they're going to remember that piece of it. And it's come in handy too with everyone going virtual because of the situation with the pandemic, so that they can also kind of explore it in a different way than they might have done before.
Yeah, wonderful. We have 5 more minutes. Do you want to talk about your next project? You've got an
Sure.
exciting project coming up.
Yes, I am working on the sequel to The Last Cherry Blossom. It takes place about 4 years later with how she's dealing and living in Tokyo and the occupation forces and the PTSD as well. And now I'm gearing up for the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing. And I'm working with various agencies in New York City with Ribbon International. And I also include that as a link. Then there's also with Washington, D.C., New York, and as well as Hiroshima. I'll be doing something virtual for that as well. And I'll be doing an author talk with Naomi Hirahara. She writes adult mysteries and she bases it on her father, who was in Hiroshima also. So we're going to do something together, which I'm really excited about, for the
Wonderful.
Japanese American
Yeah,
National Museum. So
that's fantastic. Very exciting. Are you able to do enough research online? It's difficult when you can't visit the places yourself, but
yes, I do it online. I also purchase a lot of books that used to be in libraries. And the one good thing is there's a lot more information that has been released over time. So you can find out more about the cover up and what happened with the atomic bombing. So you have a lot more material that you can work with now as well. I really hope at some point that we could go to Tokyo and I could study it more by going over there. But traveling can be difficult for me. So we kind of have to see how things go.
yeah, definitely. I think at this point in time with coronavirus, everybody is,
Yeah.
the
Yes,
travel is
exactly.
basically stopped. So if I can help in any way to find resources for you as well, of course, I will send
Oh,
those on to you. Being
thank you.
based in Hiroshima, and I
I
hope,
appreciate that.
yeah, and I hope that in the 75th year this year, there's a lot more people like you who are telling other hibakusha stories, like you're the second generation of hibakusha storytellers, right?
Yes, yes.
Because
And
this at 75 years we don't have a lot of
oh,
hibakusha who can
exactly.
still tell their story themselves, right?
It's so important to keep their voices alive so that people can know their stories. And their stories matter just as much as the reader's story matters, which I like to feel with students as well. So
Yeah, wonderful. We have a couple minutes left. Anything you want to mention before we sign off?
trying to think. No, the biggest thing was with the 75th. So that's where my mind is, trying to prepare what we're going to be doing and how we're going to participate to be able to honor them. So that's a lot of what I've been working on, as well as the sequel. So I don't can't think of anything new.
No, well,
So,
you are very easy to find online.
yes,
So I would like to recommend anybody listening and watching to go to KathleenBurkinshaw.com and also find her social media. You're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well as
yes,
YouTube.
mhm,
And
yes.
you have lots of great information and updates. And it also looks like you are a great baker. You have some nice baking recipes, I noticed.
Sometimes I do okay.
No, it looks really good. And you have to tell me the story, which I see in your profile all the time, about your ninja dog. So you're going to have to
Oh,
leave us with that story.
sure. We had gotten her from the pound, from the shelter. And within the first few weeks that she was home, we found that she kind of could sneak into areas and bring us things that were our own. And then one night, my husband and I are eating pizza, and he put the box way on the counter, and we're eating in the dining room. he goes in and he said, there's no pizza left. I'm like, how can that be? Because the cover was also back to being closed. So from that point on, we just realized she's sneaky, she's fast, and it's very unexpected, but it's been interesting with her. She's older now, so she doesn't do ninja too much anymore. But
That's great. That's so funny. Yeah, animals can be so clever and sneaky.
yes, thank you. And enjoyable too.
Yes,
So with it.
definitely. Part of the family.
Exactly.
So definitely check out her Instagram. There's fun things about her life as well as information about your books, media appearances, and hopefully soon updates about your new book coming soon. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and please take care during this coronavirus time, and good luck with all your future endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me today. Everyone, I hope they stay well and safe.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. Sorry about the title. This again is Kathleen Burkinshaw. This is Burkinshaw. This is not whatever you're seeing. Sorry. And have a good day. We'll see you back here again tomorrow. Thank you, Kathleen.
Bye-bye.